because I have this customer out here that owes me, you know, $20,000, and I need that money to put back into the business. But now I'm kind of being held hostage by them.
Obviously these things aren't like fine wine or cheese, receivables that is. They don't get better with age, right? Folks, Sven Nelson, C2C Resources, also known as the guy that gets you paid. I'm with my guest, David Paul, here today. David, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do as a career.
Sure, Sven. Thanks for having me on. I'm a CPA by trade, and in the accounting and finance world, close to 30 years now, and a CPA for about 26 of those, primarily working with small to medium-sized businesses. So I'm interested to share kind of any thoughts I have with you and your audience, and just kind of find out how I can help.
Great, great. No, that's great. So, let me ask you something. Why do you do what you do? Why choose to work with small to medium-sized businesses? What drives that?
I feel like a couple of things. One is just the connection with the owners and the management team. I like also knowing that I can help them have a real impact on their business. A lot of people think that accounting is just kind of what happens after the fact. But if you are a good accountant and you really know how those small and medium-sized businesses work, it can really impact how the operations are done. Looking, you know, being aware of things like issues with collecting receivables or other cash flow needs that the business may have, and being able to help them solve those business problems, be it uh, a new information system, be it reaching out to a bank to get some additional financing, be it to get some additional investment, or even look at selling part or all of their business, and make it, being able to have the owners know that there's someone looking out for their financial well-being. And
Yeah,
you just kind of lose that in the larger organization.
yeah, no doubt, absolutely. I can see where you feel a little bit more like part of the team working with those small to medium-sized businesses rather than just cog in the wheel, right? Where some
Right.
feel that way in a bigger organization. So I get that. Did you have like a particular mentor or someone in your life that's in a similar industry or that shares the same industry with you that you follow or stay in touch with regularly?
I do have a couple of people that I stay in touch with regularly. Is a kind of the first guy to really uh, take a chance on me. I got into an industry that I didn't know a lot about. It was the commercial real estate industry years and years ago. And my, I was an accountant, and my background is actually in public relations. That's what my degree is in. And they wanted somebody that kind of understood finance, but also understood how to talk to investors. And they kind of took a chance on me not having any knowledge of that industry at all, and kind of fell in love with it. So he and I have kind of kept close tabs on each other through the years, and really kind of he's then seen the value that accounting can bring to a business, as well as knowing somebody that can talk to investors and owners and whoever that third party may be. It may be an auditor, maybe a banker, maybe somebody that's underwriting insurance for the business, or whatever the case may be.
Sure, sure, absolutely. So what is I mean you've obviously worked in a lot of different industries, it sounds like, from real estate to
Yes.
SaaS to, I mean, what are some of the other industries you've worked in?
Um, the other one's not as big, but I've worked in some manufacturing earlier in my career. I've worked in uh, just kind of more like a service type industry where they're providing some product or service to on a wholesale basis for a retail sale. Those are the industries I've worked most in. But my philosophy is if you understand finance and accounting, you could pretty much have a contribution in any industry because there's always something that can be improved that then can have a bottom line effect on whatever industry you're dealing with and whatever that end product or service is that you're trying to interest your customers in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I agree. So, what is kind of maybe like one of your favorite client stories where you went in and totally changed how things were going and made a big impact on the business?
Sure. I would say one of mine is I was a small company that was they the head of it was a doctor, brilliant man, and knew a little bit about finance, but was more on the medical side. And we went in just after COVID had begun, and at that point they were having somebody kind of help them with the finance piece. That all fell apart, and they needed some immediate help. Kind of went in there and kind of looked at the entire operation, soup to nuts, figured out where the, you know, where the revenue, where the revenue pitfalls were, how they needed to market their business, how they needed to ramp up with. They were involved in a kind of what I'd call a COVID adjacent business. As you can imagine, during 2020 and 2021, the business just grew exponentially, and trying to keep them financially set so that they're not running too far in the red, and that they would also have a good exit once, be able to pivot once COVID was no longer a huge marketing devices. What other types of industries or what other types of products and services could they offer to those same type of clients?
Right.
And so that was really I think they were really eye open because they thought this is just going to be a guy that's going to come in and do the books. And they really didn't kind of know the full scope of what that meant. And so I really enjoyed my time working with them.
So, do you think that's a common misconception with people in your industry? Some of these small to medium sized businesses think that you're just a bookkeeper and that you're just coming in to do the books. And in all actuality, it sounds like you're more about financial planning and forecasting and just building those resources for the business. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's a very fair way to phrase it too, is that they a lot of times they think, okay, this is a sunk cost. This is just something we have to have for tax or for audit or whatever, somebody to do the books. They don't realize the that, in addition, it's not necessarily that they're just accountants are just a sunk cost. In some ways, they can actually add to the bottom line because they can help you uncover opportunities that you didn't even see. Maybe a way um, to improve the quality of your receivables so that the customers you have, they're going to pay you on a more timely basis. You're not going to have that huge cash crunch that sometimes a lot of these small to medium sized businesses fall into. They're able to shore up process so that a lot of times those small and medium sized businesses, they have so much going on that sometimes the left hand and right hand don't know what each other's doing. And they think, okay, bookkeeping is something that, you know, you're looking at after the fact, but the really good accountants kind of are operating and looking at the numbers on a daily, weekly basis. They're able to project out your cash needs. They're able to see kind of what the effects of different decisions that you want to make on the business. If you wait till you get, you know, financials by the time you're starting to look at the numbers, you've missed a huge opportunity. So you really need to have somebody that's looking at that on your behalf nonstop and be able to bring you issues and so more than just issues, bring you solutions
Right.
as to how you can help maximize your revenue and your bottom line during the entire month.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, and I think that's something that's really important in a business. You mentioned bringing solutions, right? Not just bringing headaches.
Yes,
When somebody brings you a problem, like I always ask my team, like, hey, if you have a problem, come to me with 3 solutions, right? And then we'll pick
right.
together what the best solution for that problem might be. Don't just be like, the naysayer that, comes up with all the problems. Be solutions driven team, right? So
Absolutely.
that's one thing that we notice for sure. Um, it, so you mentioned cash flow earlier, right? What do you think the
Yes.
biggest mistake is that you see in businesses making with regards to finance and cash flow? I mean, obviously, people hire me to help them collect bad debt, right? When
Right.
things gone awry. What do you think the biggest mistake is that people see when it comes to cash flow?
Um, and you probably see this in collecting debt, is I think the biggest mistake is uh, they have a disconnect between the quality of the customer and the quality of that cash flow. In other words, they may think, oh, this is a great customer, but they're not going to pay me for 75 to 90 days. Well, I was expecting to get paid in 35 days, so I've now got to make up that that cash flow somehow. Is that through short-term borrowing? Is that through cost cutting? So I think as you well know from what you do, cash is king.
Yeah,
So you've got to make a decision. Am I going to be able to collect this quickly, or am I going to have to cut some expenses, or even um, cut down on what I would consider some revenue producing items because I need to conserve cash because I have this customer out here that owes me, you know, $20,000 and I need that money to put back into the business. But now I'm kind of being held hostage by them. And I'm sure you're probably more well versed than I am as far as how you can get how you can shorten that cycle and how you can really get, I always find one of the first things we tell people is you need to automate your billing process and you need to start reaching out to customers before the money is due and say, are there any issues that you foresee in being able to pay this on time? And you offer them multiple ways to settle that invoice. And you make sure that they have all the documentation they need. Because if you wait until it becomes, like you said, bad debt, you've lost some valuable time there.
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great point because obviously these things aren't like fine wine or cheese, receivables that is. They don't get better with age, right? So the further out they go, the further you are away from getting that money in the door. And one of the things that so many of my clients struggle with is either defining a good credit policy or actually following that process, because from sales to finance and the executive leadership, right in the middle, like you got sales, finance, and executive leadership in the middle. One of the things they really struggle with is defining that policy, following that policy, and everybody being on the same page. Have you seen those types of issues in the past, and how have you dealt with them?
Yes, especially at the small to medium size. When they're growing so quickly, a lot of times the policy either it's not written down or it's not regularly reviewed and updated, or it's not a part of, when you bring a new salesperson on, it's not part of the standard onboarding. It's not part of the training, or, probably even worse than that is you see where there's too many exceptions. Well, I know that Joe is good for this money, so we're going to go ahead and bill him for this, and I know he's going to pay on time because he and I have worked together at a previous company, and you just kind of have to throw all that out. And I'm not saying there aren't going to be unique circumstances. There are, but I think the more you can write down what do you do when you get to one of these unique circumstances, and it can't be one person making the decision unilaterally for the whole company because that's going to affect, unless you're dealing with a sole proprietor, that's going to affect more than just that person.
Yeah.
Because it may affect what the leadership team wants to do from a sales and operations standpoint with another customer.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to know there has to be a process in and I think communication is important too to your customer up front. These are our terms, and this is what we're going to do if we don't get paid in this time. One of the things I brought up the company during COVID, and one of the things I kept seeing is on some of the problem accounts, I said, we could just cut off this service because it was something they would log into and they would see it was basically see results of the testing. And I said, well, we could just cut that off until they pay. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. We
Right.
don't want to risk that we're not going to get a, a renewal contract.
Future
And
business. Right. Right. Yeah.
right, exactly. But I think if you're upfront with them, I mean, now, does that mean that you can't have a situation where maybe they've run into a cash crunch and they need a little bit more time? Sure, but again, like I said, that kind of goes back to that written policy and have people in place to kind of um, ratify that decision. And you memorialize that and say, okay, the customer said they're going to pay in 15 days. Well, then you're checking back in with that customer maybe on day 12 and say, hey, are you going to be prepared to send this money on day 15? And if not, then what's the escalation process?
Right.
Like I said,
Right.
I'm sure these are, by your background, I'm sure these are things you've seen before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've been at it a little while, 20 plus years. But it's good to hear everybody else's stance on it. You know, I'm sure like you and everybody else in your industry have worked with these sales driven organizations, right? And that's what makes it tough because and I always preach this that sales makes a decision to extend credit based on feelings, right? They feel like this is going to be
Right,
a question or company, this is going to be a great client for them. And finance
right,
makes it based on a facts, right? So
right,
um, I know that people have issues from time to time just painting that picture for sales so that they understand clearly why finance is saying no and why finance doesn't think this is a great idea. And, bridging the gap between the sales and finance function is something that I think is key. And I think you touched on something earlier that a lot of people don't really expect from the finance department, which is you can actually help the sales department increase their revenue by identifying other opportunities where maybe a particular customer has the ability to you can extend them more credit, they can buy more from you,
right.
right, by leveraging that credit line and giving them credit increases at the right times and right places in the right scenarios. You can actually help sales to improve what they're doing. And I think that was a strong point that you made earlier. So that was very interesting to hear that come out of your mouth because not a lot of people think.
Absolutely.
So
Well, I look at myself as a partner with the sale. I mean, I'm not naive enough to know that I know that my salary is paid by the sales team, in indirectly. So I mean, I can't have an antagonistic relationship. And I look at it as my job is to throw up any red flags that I may see. Now, in my career, I've seen times where I throw up the red flag and they say, you know what, we're still going to do this. Okay, that's great. And I'll help you manage through that. But um, you know, and maybe there are no problems, but maybe then if there are problems, they'll come to me and say, okay, David, now we've got to this point. What do you suggest we do from here?
right,
And so, I look at myself, a lot of people kind of going back to what you said before, think of accountants as, and I like to use sports analogies like, they're the they're the scorekeeper. They're not active participants in the game. But I think true financial leaders
Hmm.
actually are participants in the game. So I look at myself as I'm not out there running the plays, but I'm calling the plays, and I'm looking at all the analytics and saying, okay, in 60% of the time, I think this pass play is going to work here. So maybe that's something you need to consider. And I think if you do that, then you're gonna endear yourself to those other departments, to sales, to operations, to R&D in the case of a development type organization.
From a personal perspective, it's almost the same analogy of having a personal CPA that does your taxes versus somebody that's actually doing tax planning for you, right? And it's
Right.
two different roles, right? I mean, you have
Correct.
the person that does your taxes, and then you have somebody that if you're going that route, you have somebody that's doing tax planning for you, putting you in a better position, way ahead of the game, right? They foresee the future
Right.
and they know how to, work the tax code so you get the you know, best return on your taxes, right? Or you have to pay less
Right.
than everybody else. So that's interesting. I like the analogy with the sports for sure. So, what is it that makes you feel inspired about the work that you're doing, David? What's driving you to do this?
Especially now at this point in my career, I've been working in accounting about 30 years. I like being able to help those businesses really, and to be able to, use what knowledge and best practices I've developed over the last 30 years, and not just me, I mean my teams and mentors of mine, and be able to share that with others, whether it be speaking on a forum like this, whether it be a one-on-one meeting with someone, or rather it be in a where I'm doing either some consulting or I'm working for a company. I kind of look at it all the same as I'm in it because I want to see you succeed. And if I can play a small part in that, that's kind of what gets me out of bed and gets me going in the morning. Is I think, how can I make it better?
I love that.
I kind of operate under the continuous improvement mindset.
I love that. No, I too have the service mindset of being of service, and I mean that's why I do things like this because I just want people to tell their stories because inevitably you're going to tell your story and somebody else is going to find interesting something interesting there or something helpful within that story. Speaking of which, I personally feel like we learn a lot from our successes, but we also learn a lot from our failures, right?
Yes,
And this question, may throw you off, but is there ever a time where you feel like maybe you could have handled something differently, maybe you could have made a different decision, and you learned from that? Was there a I don't want to say a failure, but something that didn't go right as planned, and you really learned?
absolutely.
What was probably the moment that sticks out in your mind?
Oh gosh. Over that long a career, there's multiple ones, but I'd say one that really sticks out is, and especially when I was my last role, I was more of a consultant. I worked for a fractional CFO in an accounting firm. And so part of it was I was working with those small and medium-sized businesses. And the one thing I learned both directly as kind of maybe one thing I didn't do as well, and learning from my boss, is that sometimes you need to worry about what the client needs rather than what the client is asking you to do. And I know it sounds contradictory, like you're always supposed to do what the client wants, the customer's always right. Well, yes and no. I mean, you want to please them, obviously, but sometimes, honestly, they don't know exactly what they need. And they think they need one thing, but if you spend more time up front in finding out, okay, what's the end result here? What are you really looking to do?
Yep.
Then maybe that kind of helps reorient how you are focused. So, in this case, it was a company, and we were kind of taking over all of their accounting and finance internally, and um, met with a couple of the principals there, and they were saying, well, we need this, and then we need this. I didn't take the time to kind of step back and say, okay, what's the goal here? Rather than you just asking piecemeal bit by bit. And had I done that, I think the engagement would have gone a lot better than it did. Um, I still think we did a great job for them, but I think that's one thing I've learned is not only listen to what they say, but listen to maybe what they don't say, or be able to ask questions to be able to hone in on specifically what they're looking for.
It's interesting you say that. So I also own a financial capital brokerage, right? And a lot of the times the companies will come to us and they need working capital or they need this for whatever reason. And they're just not aware of what loans are out there and what resources are available to them. So they may think they need one thing, but in fact, they could do way better with something completely opposite or just completely different that they didn't know existed or were aware of. So that's interesting.
Right.
I see that as well. So we talked about failure. What's a compliment that you've ever received about what you do? Is there any compliments that stick out that really made you smile and you were like, yeah, I can relate to that?
Sure. I guess I've um, well, two different kinds of compliments. One is I've had multiple clients or employers saying that they feel that I'm incredibly trustworthy, that they could, you know, let me manage millions of dollars and wouldn't bat an eye over it, wouldn't worry at all that I wouldn't put that to the best use. And the other compliment is I've had um, one person I can think of. I've had this happen multiple times in my career, but somebody that um, I saw the potential in and kind of groomed them to, succeed. And this person has actually had multiple promotions in the time that I've known her, and it was just her willingness to jump in and do, what was being asked, and just have that intellectual curiosity and be able to say, how can I get better? What do I need to do? And I love working with people like that, and I love the people that I've worked with, seeing them succeed.
That's
Um,
great. No, that's awesome. I love that. I love that. So, are there any books that you're reading currently or anything that you've read recently that you think kind of resonates with business or finance in general?
gosh, I can't think of anything real recently, honestly. I do keep up with, I've kept up with some finance podcasts and stuff over the years, but really I just kind of look for financial news and kind of figure out what is kind of take a pulse of what's going on with the overall economy, and look at specific industries, maybe what's driving change. Really, what I've been probably studying more now than anything is AI, and what effects that's having on the traditional accounting role. And while I see a lot of the basic, the bookkeeping and that kind of stuff, yes, that could be automated, but I think you'll always need, well, I think at least for the for the foreseeable future, you'll need someone that's going to be able to help take that information that AI is giving and be able to synthesize that in a form that is going to be acceptable to management, to all the different stakeholders, investors, auditors, um, you know, tax professionals. Now, could there be a day, 25 years from now where AI is doing that as well? Sure. But I still think you're going to need somebody to coach the AI, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Um, I
definitely.
think I think people shouldn't be fearful of AI replacing them, but more look at how can their jobs evolve to where AI is doing a lot of the things that they were doing, and what then can they do to help AI continue to develop? And I think that's going to be a bigger part of the skill set. So that's why I've been focusing more time on studying the trends there, doing a lot more of my own chat GPT and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's more so how can we implement it into what we do, right? How can we help
Right.
us, right? So make our jobs
Yeah,
easier. No, I agree. AI is
absolutely.
definitely on the forefront of everybody's minds. I mean, it's the biggest change in modern history as far as technology is concerned, for sure. One of the things that I like to ask people is if you could ever have dinner with somebody that may be alive or no longer living, is there any particular person that you've always said, I'd really love to sit down with this person, whether they're famous or not, and why would you have dinner with that person? Why would you choose that person?
Oh gosh. Wow, that's a big question. Um, I guess the first person that comes to mind is George Washington, only because the more I'm a history nerd to begin with, but the more I realized about, you were kind of talking about, being a servant leader, being of service, and I think about all of the different ways he contributed to um, to basically the betterment of not only the country, but just the betterment of people around him. He was always someone that saw the best in others. Was also seemed like a lot of what he did. He did it from a point of humility. The Continental Congress wanted to name him a king, and he said no. And he wanted to step down after 2 terms and let somebody else take the reins. And I really think that takes a special kind of person to do that. And so I'm kind of fascinated to get inside his mind and find out, how he made it through some of the tough times. When, uh, for example, how he survived the winter at Valley Forge, and um, all of the all of the crises that came up during the early part of the United States, and how he was able to deal with that and bring out the best in others. Because I think it could be a model of leadership for any of us that kind of view ourselves in that servant leader role.
That's great. No, that's an interesting choice. I like that, and I didn't know that about him. Some of the things that you talked about there, so that's great. If there was one thing that you could tell your 20-year-old self that you've learned throughout your career and throughout your over 30 years in the accounting industry, is there anything in particular you would go back and tell your 20-year-old self about, you know, what you've been and what you've accomplished, or anything that you've learned from that experience that you would tell yourself?
Sure, I would probably say um, listen more and speak less. Would definitely be one thing. When I was in my 20s, I was working for a company that was doing a lot of acquisitions, and so in in doing that, I would have people that were my age now reporting to a 20-something-year-old kid, and they probably thought this kid doesn't know what he's talking about. And in some ways, they were right. I didn't. I knew what they taught you in school, but I didn't have the kind of the business hard knocks yet at that point. And so I think if I really had honed in more on what people around me were saying, and just be a little bit more observant of the big picture items, that maybe things would have gone a little smoother. I'm still happy with where I've ended up, but I think some of it would have been, I guess, the road would have been a little less bumpy along the way.
I think those bumps are great because like our failures, we learn from hard times, so we have to
Absolutely.
embrace those hard times so we can enjoy the good times. That's the way I look at things that go negative or something's not going my way, then, I'm just like, this is here for a reason, right? This is a teaching moment. This is a learning moment for me. So speaking of that, my last question I have for you that I always like to ask people is, um, somebody that's coming into this career now, right? Somebody that's a CPA or going to be a CFO, or that's their role. What would you tell them that they should be cautious of, or anything that you would use to motivate them? Anything that you would say to younger generations that are coming into the ranks?
Sure. I would say they need to just get a better grasp of the entire business cycle and not just be so focused on the accounting. I realize in school they teach you just to be focused on the accounting, and even, those that come out of the big accounting firms, that's you're there to do this specific job, and they're very regimented. But I find that some of those folks, they don't make that transition from, say, school to their first few jobs, or from a big accounting firm into industry, because they don't, they've only kind of learned that one area, and I think they need to, even if they don't have exposure in what they're doing now, they need to get it, whether it be, through consuming online content, whether it be from networking, or just talking to other people in the business about things like, talk to the sales staff, talk to the engineers, talk to the IT folks, because they've really can teach you a lot about business that you don't that your 20-year-old self or your graduating self isn't necessarily going to be aware of.
Yeah.
Um, but I always, my parents raised me that when I went to a new business, they said you always want to make friends with the administrative assistant, because he or she kind of runs the show behind the scenes, and they're going to be able to make sure that you have the access to the people and the resources you need. Because if you make them mad, they're going to make your life miserable. And so,
Sure.
and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, they they have uh, a lot of power, I guess, not necessarily in a written format, but they they wield a lot of influence for sure.
Well, that I would agree with, most definitely. So, David, thank you very much for coming on. I really, really appreciated getting to know you and hearing your thoughts on all the topics and questions. I really appreciate you coming on here and spending some time with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before closing out?
No, I really enjoyed it, Sven, and I hope your audience took something out of this that maybe they didn't know before about what uh, what the accounting profession is and what it isn't, and maybe they had one thought as to what an accountant did, and maybe now their knowledge has expanded a little bit more. So if we did that, if we touched a nerve there, that's great.
I think we definitely did. I think we definitely did. So, thank you again. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to the next conversation, David.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks,
Take care.
Sven. I appreciate it.